Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another long form conversation. I am extremely excited about this today's long form conversation because we have with us Jeremy Rise, who is a physicist, researcher, and media producer who runs the website Alien Scientist, as well as the popular YouTube channel that puts forth a very rational approach to what you would call, I guess, extraterrestrials, quote unquote, conspiracy theories. Again, we're finding nowadays that, you're whether it's with what's going on in the world now with as they say, the beep boop that a lot of people are getting, or even with respects to disclosure. They say the average, quote unquote, conspiracy is, anywhere from 30 to 90 days away from being something that turns out to be confirmed or reality, if you will. So with that being said, Jeremy, sir, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
Zed, thanks for having me, man. This is gonna be fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, there's so many places where we could start, but if you would you be able to just tell everyone why you started Alien Scientist all the way back when, and what motivated you to do that? Any experiences of your own, anything of that type?
I think my research started around 2003, 2004, and I read a book called Behold a Pale Horse, and I met some people that were, into a lot of this conspiracy stuff, and started teaching me, some ins and outs of, what the Federal Reserve banking structure, how banks create money out of nothing through fractional reserve lending, this whole, this whole new way of looking at society from this top down, that the realization that there are secret societies. I kind of in the 2000 election, I think it was like, you know a real eye opener when I think it was Bush that ran against Kerry. And
Sorry, Gore or Kerry?
oh,
Because
it was Bush was Gore. Yeah, Bush and Gore was 2000, right?
yeah,
And then
yeah.
2004 is like when that was 2004 is when I really had the awakening, because Bush was running in the election against John Kerry.
Yeah.
And it became obvious that that was contrived. They were both Skull and Bones members at Yale, members of the same secret society. And I started looking into, a lot of these secret societies and esoteric knowledge and stuff as well. At the time, I was in college for physics at Bridgewater State University. I grew up in the Bridgewater Triangle. It's home to a lot of legends of paranormal and UFO and other Native American activity. One of the most deadly battles in U.S. territory was fought right in the Bridgewater Triangle. It was called the King Philip's War, and it was in 1675. And it killed like 10% of the colonists and a good portion of the Native American population. And
Whoa.
so this like some weird stuff that's history that's from the area where I'm from. And I kind of grew up with a lot of these things. I read Chariot of the Gods in high school, that book by Eric von Daniken that all the Ancient Aliens TV series was based upon. So it kind of got me interested in thinking about, aliens and science, but I've always been interested in science too. And I was in school for physics around that time when I started, waking up to a lot of this stuff. And I said, like, you can't really talk about this stuff publicly. They won't let you won't get on Joe Rogan. I was noticing like the people that Joe Rogan was, he did really good early on with Joe Rogan's Questions Everything, and he got a lot of popularity and attention early on. But I feel like he sold out somewhere between then after that show, because he like stopped questioning everything and started really like buying a lot of official narratives for certain topics, and pushed a lot of really weird narratives, like his support of this Bob Lazar thing. And Bob Lazar is I have mixed feelings on him.
I was actually
Everyone knows.
thank you. I was going to ask you about Mr. Lazar. Just yeah, if you could give your take on Mr. Lazar, then if it's cool, before we move on, I just wanted to ask how and why you started the Alien Scientist website back in '08. So either
Yeah.
or, yeah.
Yeah, well, Bob Lazar was definitely in it. I grew up in the 90s watching Unsolved Mysteries with John Stack and so I was Robert Stack, sorry. And John Walsh was the other guy, right? John Walsh and Robert Stack. Yeah, so Bob Lazar was all over television, in the 90s when I was growing up. So, but in 2002, 2004, I think I started getting into, anti-gravity research. Is there anything on this? What's going on? Is there craft, and we have technologies beyond this stuff? And American Anti-Gravity with Tim Ventura was actually a big influence on that too, because he was doing a lot of research with those lifters and things like that during the time. So as you know, Tim, I'm now teamed up with him 15 years, 20 years later, and we're doing groundbreaking work in this field that nobody else seems to really be interested in doing, at least not talking about publicly. And we're trying to bring it out to the public and have open conferences on this stuff. But yeah, that's sort of the motivation behind how I started Alien Scientists. I was coming across a lot of information on anti-gravity technology and research that I had been doing for a number of years. I had gotten a hold of this guy named Ed Fouché. I had found him through researches, and he was not on mainstream television and unsolved mysteries like Mr. Lazar all throughout the 90s. He came out in 1998 and wrote a book, and I did a couple of videos on his research, which I rediscovered like 6 years later in 2004, and I started making a couple of videos on it. And I think 2008 is when I started the Alien Scientist channel and made a couple, like, I condensed those earlier videos and made like a better, summary video, which still, got a lot of things wrong and missed a lot of important details and information that I would find later. Actually, there's a he's the guy that disclosed the TR-3B. And there's a documentary coming out on the TR-3B. He's the first guy that ever talked about it, and it's never been confirmed as a real craft, but there's been a ton of sightings.
His full name again? My apologies.
It's Edgar Allan Fouché.
Edgar
Albert Fouché. He wrote under the pen name Edgar Rothschild Fouché for his book Alien Rapture. Okay. And that was Brad Steiger who suggested to him that he should use that pen name because he felt like the Rothschild name would get people's attention more. But unfortunately, it's that, and pointing out that his grandfather worked for the French secret police under Napoleon, led to a lot of people like Richard Dolan and others to like think that he was actually counterintelligence. And I've gone back and forth on Ed, whether or not he came out with that story as counterintelligence or what. But there, because if this a TR-3B, man, it's been so, why hasn't that been disclosed or leaked? Why hasn't something more come out on this, unless they discontinued it when around that time. Although there's some videos showing these triangles over Iraq too that were like these, they said were some kind of stealth technology that they're using.
Right. Yes.
And so Ed Fouché, more importantly than the TR-3B though, is he was the first person to talk about Area 51 black programs involving metamaterials and quasi-crystals research. And he stressed those two materials very hard as the super materials that they were really most interested in understanding and building and working with.
Right.
As you know, invisibility cloaks function on using metamaterials, these arrays of C-ring resonators.
Right.
That can they create it's like same like noise cancellation headphones. It's like radar cancellation antenna systems or natural resonant responses.
Well, before you go on, I just wanted to say, even for the audience, for those who don't know, that from my understanding, from what I checked last night, Lockheed Martin quietly updated their website, not yesterday, but fairly recently, basically admitting they have invisibility cloaking technology. Saying that again, this is where sort of I wanted to ask you about tying into Bob Lazar anti-gravity, that Lockheed Martin explained on their website that gravity is a wave and that they've been able to bend the waves around it. Speaking of which, I wanted to, again,
Yes.
you're the expert here, obviously. Was there sort of a multi-pronged question, but do you see consistency with what Mr. Lazar said back in the 90s relative to now? I know there's theories and speculation he stole some concepts from others and things like that. And also, was there any one thing in your personal life when researching anti-gravity that made you go, holy shit, like the scientific community, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, they're deliberately ignoring all this?
Um, well, yeah, that's quite a few points to cover
Yeah.
there.
Sorry.
Let's
Yeah.
start with the issue of there's a couple different ideas that have come up for anti-gravity, and the earlier ones relate to a coupling between electromagnetism and gravity. And there's been a lot of suspicion about a particle called the graviton, which is wave-like in nature. So then the LIGO experiment, as you know, is this LIGO and its sister project. I forget what the other one was called. There was two of them actually, and they made two labs so that they could. There's a big scandal that went on because they were apparently not supposed to communicate with each other on their results so that they could have independent findings, and that it could be, two different facilities that
Sorry,
ran these experiments.
just to clarify for the audience, who were the two different facilities that were not supposed to communicate with each other?
LIGO and Virgo.
Okay.
Is it LIGO and Virgo? Yeah, so it's LIGO, Virgo, and this they were supposed to, work independently and of each other, and then share. Then that way they could, compare their data and compare their results. But they were caught actually communicating and comparing their data because they were afraid, that if they published, then maybe, I don't know, which was very it caused a controversy, which I haven't seen much of. It's kind of been buried, but because that would really affect their funding. And
who are they owned by? Who do they answer to, if I may ask? LIGO and Virgo?
so I think this was who is this a LIGO and Virgo were paid for by observatories. Let's look them up.
Okay.
So they
Okay.
were hold up. This is the National Science Foundation. I knew it was government. The government funded this. I was just trying to find out which organization. They have I think Caltech was in charge of it, and the European Gravitational Observatory. Virgo is funded by the European Gravitational Observatory, EGO. So I don't know what EGO consists of. So there's some digging to do here, definitely, into the
Right.
funding and the money people behind this that I haven't really gotten into. I'm just trying to overview the science. I mentioned
That's
them
okay.
because
Yep.
we wave-like nature. So it's been confirmed that gravity is wave-like. It when these two superclusters supernovas collide, basically when a large object falls into a black hole, it creates these waves.
Right.
And that's what they kind of sensed and they detected. And they did it by using a laser shined down a long hallway to a mirror and bounced back. And then they look at the fringes, and they actually used squeezed coherent states to improve the resolution and efficiency on these things, which I talked about. That squeezed coherent states can be useful in the gravity warp drives as well, that use trapped light with these quasi-crystals and metamaterials. But this goes back to a guy named Edward Mills Purcell in the 60s, who discovered something called nuclear magnetic resonance, and the idea that atoms are kind of like spinning tops, and that they, you put them in a magnetic field and they spin up, they turn their spin and they align with the magnetic field. And then when you take off the magnetic field, they gradually, precess back until you bounce them back again. And different ones relax at different times, and they relax more slowly, and you can use that that sort of bouncing action and read that to figure out what it's used in chemistry. In most graduate chemistries labs are based around the NMR machine, which gives spectrographic readouts, which shows you elemental composition. And it does that through this nuclear magnetic resonance phenomena, that different atoms, as they're heavier or lighter, will spin or more magnetic, or versus it's like a magnetic point of magnetism to weight ratio kind of thing. And it's called the Larmor precession of these atoms. But anyways, this was discovered, and this led to the discovery of metamaterials that, they said, well, certain symmetries work really good for, on if we build a grid that's the same wavelength as the Russian radar system, and we put that grid on our plane, it makes it invisible to that, radar frequency. Stuff like that, where they realize that there's this coupling between wavelengths and actual like sizes of things, that you can manipulate the waves by building a grid. And because the wave like nature of the space actually sees the grid like a solid object, like a box. It's like glass is clear for optical frequencies, but if you go in the infrared, if you go in the ultraviolet, it becomes opaque. So that's the point in the frequency where it becomes higher than the spacing between the molecules, and so it gets caught inside the molecules rather than passing directly through it. If you understand.
Is this, sorry, before you go on, sir, is this, I know that obviously within the community of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, there needs to be obviously loads of funding for such things to be delved into and researched, thoroughly. Is there any type of funding or inquiries about this relative to, certain physicists at, Oxford, Yale, Stanford, Harvard, the main sort of universities, or is there, what are you seeing when you look at that?
I haven't seen any real funding for, a lot of this funding was cut off by the government in the 60s by something called the Mansfield Amendment.
Okay.
And that limited a lot of the funding for experimental projects without like a definitive goal in mind. So, you have engineering projects that are based around known science, but they've cut off all like the experimental stuff that really looks into new science that's not established yet, sort of the fringe, and they cut off a lot of the funding for that kind of stuff.
Do you think why they did that? Do you think there was a deliberate purpose?
Yeah, it was there was a lot of anti-gravity research that was being done in the government up until that point, and it was causing a lot of rumors that we had stuff, and I don't know if that was bad or what. They didn't want people to think that, or I thought it would be at least advantageous to make our adversaries during the Cold War think that we had more exotic capabilities than we really did. But I don't understand exactly why that Mansfield Amendment got passed, but it's certainly something that when we talk to our senators, like that big phone home, that should have been something, that should be something I mentioned, and that will be put together. And I'm going to make a shorter briefing, I think, for my senator, and just to talk about some of the legislation that should be looked at and maybe overturned, because there should be more funding for this type of research, anti-gravity research, and also the invisibility and invisibility cloak research. Because it relates to quantum computing, a lot of this stuff. And there's been a huge funding, I know, with, what is it, the Office of Science and Technology Policy? And technology policy, yeah, here it is. So there's the White House opened up. If you go to whitehouse.gov, you can search for the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And they recently allocated, I gotta get the exact number, but it was a couple $2 billion. It was a good chunk of the budget that they're trying to put towards, developing the next stage of technologies. Like one of the things was quantum computing. They were down here at URI in Rhode Island a couple weeks ago.
I just wanted to ask, do you, being, observing and having your finger on the pulse of this, not just community, but these topics for so long, and seemingly based off of, your social media following politics to quite an extent relative to trying to get anti-gravity out there in a formal way, do you think that no matter how much money is put, whether it's 2 billion, 20 billion, to 100 billion, for example, towards this, for example, just for the sake of playing devil's advocate respectfully, do you think that no matter how much money, big or small, is put into it, it still comes down to who is someone, I guess you could say, within the shadow government, as they call it, approves or disapproves of the dissemination of some of these findings? Again, the concept behind is certain individuals that are members of what's been known to be Majestic 12. They give the green light or the red light as to whether or not something like the missing formula, if you will, can be released publicly to a certain issue.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of fear in academia about speaking out and being, being like an outcast. It seems like that people don't understand tenure these days, because tenure was supposed to be like you've established yourself in the academic community, and now you can start, causing waves and breaking out of traditional forms of thinking.
Right.
And there are a lot of celebrity physicists and scientists who have seemed to have taken over like the field. And Michio Kaku did some great work on and like they had that whole thing he did for, I think it was Discovery Channel, where they had this inside a UFO, and he talked a little bit about the physics of how these things would work and stuff. And that inspired me to do a video where I was like, well, the invisibility cloaks would use metamaterials, and this is kind of a little bit how it works, and some of the science to look into, to try to introduce, this community to the real scientific principles, and also introduce the scientific community who's like, oh, well, maybe there's something to this UFO stuff, like you can make things invisible. I mean, just imagine, and then, I talk about another thing I like to talk about is the issue of quantum radar and the short and interesting life of that it had within the military. So they built the first quantum radar systems, and the way that quantum radar, I know it sounds funny, you're just throwing the word quantum around, but it actually works on entanglement. So they take like the photon, they split it in two, and they use two radars to kind of, hit it with these entangled photons. So that way, if you have invisibility, anything in there that's invisible, or spoofing the signal, to the radar return or anything like that, then you'll have what's called entanglement breaking, disentanglement, and that you'll be able to detect that. Now the problem was apparently that they shut down the program and removed the systems because they had too many false positives. But I have a feeling that these false positives were actually, it just opened up our view to like just how much invisible stuff's flying out there. And that's why it got shut down instead. So it's one of those things, and then it's not talked about at all. Like you can't, like they had a couple like MIT, they had one MIT article on it, and it was like that was it. And I know that those students like instantly got a contract, and it often goes through DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. I don't think this like a secret government group that I'm aware of that picks up this stuff. It's pretty over the table across the board, but the details of those contracts may not become public until like years later or decades later through FOIA and stuff. So there's interesting things like that you have to just be in the you have to be looking for in the right place at the right time and know something about all the science and technology to even pick up on something.
Did any of those events? Did any of those like, for example, the example that you just gave right there, which thank you, that was phenomenal, by the way. Did anything like that occur to you earlier, like in the mid to late like mid 2000s, that made you want to start alienscientist.com? Was there one particular event of any type, or was it just that it just kind of flowed into starting it up in 2008?
Honestly, I think when I heard about metamaterials and quasi-crystals, and I just started searching all the academic literature on those back in 2004, 2005, I just saw, I don't know, it just was like the download happened.
Right.
And I just saw it. I saw the future 20, 50 years, 100 years ahead. And I was like, oh my God, because I had read a book. I had recently read a paper. There's plenty of room at the bottom. And I was really into Richard Feynman at the time. I was studying physics in college, and I was reading every Richard Feynman book that I could find. And he had this whole and I was reading the Feynman lectures on physics, and there was a couple things in there that he talked about that I one of them was this whole idea of sorry, what were we just talking about?
If there
There's so
was,
many things in that book.
oh no,
I'm just,
no worries, man. It was
my
just
brain's going in a million directions. So
no worries at all. It was just if there was one instance, whether it was from reading his book or maybe a UFO sighting of some kind personally, that made you motivated to start this website.
yeah, it was that whole thing of the quasi-crystals and metamaterials. And when I was like, he had this whole thing about, there's plenty of room at the bottom, and it was about nanotechnology and something called Moore's law, about how small we can make computer chips, and then the heat that they produce, and we'll eventually get to a point where they'll be producing more heat than our nuclear reactor cores. And
Wow.
but for the computation, and then how to make the chip smaller and smaller. And so they eventually, I don't think they realized back then that they could use NMR and spintronics to reduce, computation, not only the temperature output, but the energy requirements, because it's real easy to, suspend atoms in a lattice and then have them just spin freely with incident electromagnetic waves. And there was books written on this in the 60s and 70s that didn't put the pieces haven't really been put together all yet. They're just beginning to be put together. They were just starting to be put together in the late 90s. And I think that a lot of these secret programs are maybe a decade or so ahead. And they've recruited a lot of the people for this because they've known. I think they knew in mid 1980s, 1984, 1985, when a lot of the research was being done at the University of Rochester, and the first coherent light, the first coherent matter wasn't until 10 years after that, 1994, the first Bose-Einstein condensate was created with supercooling cesium atoms. But before that, it was 10 years before they created the first condensed light, and that was at University of Rochester, up in upstate New York. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on that's coming out now. This was right around the time that Bob, a couple of years after that, Bob Lazar came out with the element 115 stuff, which I want to get into and talk about.
I did.
So
yeah.
That I think he got from, because he didn't come out with it right away. He said he was a physicist and he was going to reveal the secrets, in May 1989.
Right.
And in May 1990.
Sorry if it's okay. Sorry, brother. I just wanted to ask one quick thing regarding, before we go to Lazar, very quickly, the quantum radar aspect of it. Did you hear about recently that former DIA scientist releasing some clips and screenshots and alleged, I don't know, it seemed like a quantum radar, but it seemed like a UFO mothership manifesting smaller holograms of craft. And they said that this individual off the record said that those within the DIA that are familiar with this radar call it the UF, something like the alien hunting binoculars, something like this.
Yeah, binoculars. So that's the key right there. Is because I remember I mentioned that they split the photon and then send it out through two systems like binoculars.
Yes, right.
And it has to be two, because it has to be from two angles with the entangled photons, and that's how it works. It's by quantum entanglement. And
so you think those binoculars, if they, for example, were handed out to,
I don't know, they might be talking about a different type of, because they have the what's called the eyes or the binocs that are on a ship, and that's not, I don't think those are quantum radar. They're just these big binoculars that they use for spotting, on the ship.
Right.
And,
okay.
So I'm not sure exactly what, because there's different things, This is the quantum radar stuff was experimental. I don't think it was ever deployed on an actual naval vessel, or
Okay.
it was actually deployed in the field for enlisted men to use. I think it was one of those programs that they tried it out and it didn't go there. So I don't know.
Sure. Let's carry on with Lazar, if that's cool. I
But
apologize.
but yeah, as far as the wave nature, a lot of people knew that waves, or at least predicted, back in the 80s, that waves were the answer to gravity, and that gravity worked on waves. So it's not too far off. I mean, you could listen to Lazar's old thing. He said that there was a gravity A wave and a gravity B wave.
Yep.
And what he described as the gravity A wave was just regular gravity, but this gravity B wave, the way he described it, it was almost like the strong nuclear force. And I thought that was interesting because I come up across a couple theories before, through over the years, including one by Frank Sonardzik, where he talked about using the strong nuclear force and being able to extend it beyond the nucleus. And that kind of sounds like something Lazar maybe talked about with that gravity B wave. If we could experimentally prove such a thing, but it's never been done. But the other thing about Lazar's story is the element 115 thing, right? There we found he came out with that in October 1989 was the first time when he gave that first interview with George Knapp, where he talked about the element 115. Now we found, and George Knapp, I confronted George Knapp with the article, and he claims that he had covered it early on in his journalism and reporting on the Bob Lazar story. But realistically, that should have ended a lot of the controversy right there, because it was
Wait, sorry, you confronted Mr. Knapp with what exactly?
I had the May 1989 issue of Scientific American, where on page 68, it has a whole article on element 115 and the island of stability. And it's by these guys, Armbruster, these two German scientists working at CERN over in Germany.
Right.
At one of the big particle accelerators over there. And they had done a bunch of research that had created element 109 at the time, and they were working on creating higher and higher elements. And they were the guys that actually created element 115.
They mentioned that in Rogan's
later.
podcast with Corbell and Lazar. I think they had mentioned that, but
not a Scientific American article. No, because that predates Lazar's thing.
Sorry, not the article, not the article. The point where they had mentioned, but they didn't specify to the extent that you did. They said, I think Rogan said, didn't they manage?
They left out key details. Yes, right, on purpose.
Right. That's what I'm trying.
That's called disinformation, right there.
Right.
It's when you tell half the story, but you don't tell the whole story. The real story is that in May 1989, that article came out in Scientific American. It talked about the island of stability. It talked about element 115. It talked about the possibility, the idea of using it as fuel for future spacecraft, because, the heavy elements, I mean, you can pack a lot of density in there. There's a lot of mass, equals MC squared. That's energy, that's bang for your buck. Yeah. So you can pack a lot of energy inside these super heavy elements if you could find a way to make them stable. And they may be a way to, there's ways to there's ways to make things stable by setting up the right electromagnetic field around an atom. You can take something that would normally decay and keep it stable if you put it in a box where it can't go nowhere, basically. So there might be a way to find this an element. They said it was closer to element 114 in that article, but they gave some of the isotopes and the isotopes that they gave were the ones that Lazar would later say were the ones. So it's clear like that he had to have gotten it from that article, because it predates that, and he's the kind of guy that was reading science magazines. And I've shown that there was another movie called Fat Man and Little Boy. Or Little Man, Fat Boy and Little Man, I think it was called. And it was a movie about Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. And of course, he's got old videos of him going to the Los Alamos National Heritage Museum, where they have the Fat Man. And he's like, I have pictures of him, of Bob, in front of that Fat Man thing. So it's clear that he did some work at Los Alamos. We later found out that he was part of the radiation health monitoring team, and that he repaired alpha probes and was part of like that whole business, which is why he went to different parts of the base and knew people and was like a rabbit in his burrow, according to George Knapp. So there's explanations for the whole story that I found through my research, talking to people that worked with him at Los Alamos. You know, a lot of people weren't willing to go on the record, just didn't want the attention or the headache that goes with all that.
They spoke to you personally?
They spoke to me and other researchers that I've worked with. Yes. And we actually got a hold of Bob Lazar's ex-wife too. So Bob Lazar has been married 3 times. His first wife died under some suspicious circumstances. And then that's when he started dating the second wife and was and apparently he was running a brothel and leaving in the middle of the night and telling her that he was leaving and working at Area 51. So this whole thing like started as I believe as a lie that he was telling his wife at the time. But by the way, he married her and then his wife he married her while still married to the other woman. Then she died a month later, and then he got remarried to her under a different name, like to try to hide the original marriage. And there's a lot of weird stuff in his past that looks like, you know, that and she told us to read a book called Who is Clark Rockefeller to understand the case a little bit better. And I went and looked up that guy. Clark Rockefeller was this guy who committed a murder out in California and then ran from it and went to New Hampshire and was living under a different name, changed his name to Clark Rockefeller. His real name was something else. And he pretended to be part of the Rockefeller family, and he just bullshitted his way to the top of all these societies because they gave him
like Epstein.
He gave him all this power and clout just because they thought he was the real he thought he was a Rockefeller, and he wasn't. And it all came down. Then like his wife started, you know, like why she started be like, why does he always have to file his taxes different? And he's got all these weird things that he's doing that just they kind of don't make sense. And so she went and hired a private investigator to look into him, and he found all the stuff. And then they went and, you know, and then he went back to, they extradited him to California, and he stood trial for the murder that he had ran from. And it's weird because, you know, I don't know too much about Bob and the whole case, and I don't want to like, you know, get like super personal on it. I've heard, you know, a lot of rumors about his family being connected to mafia and stuff too. So it's like not something I, you know, almost like want to mess with, but I think he was hired as disinformation at the very best, the very least case that he met John Lear, okay, who was a CIA disinformation agent extraordinaire. Even though he did reveal information about Area 51 and put Area 51 on the map, I think that a lot of the research and other stuff like that had been moved away from there by that point, and that the Russians were already so aware and knew about it that it was like, you know, why not just they used that as a distraction point as they fractured a lot of these programs up and they moved them deeper underground where the Russians couldn't find them. But they knew the Russians were all about area. The Russians were photographing Area 51. They were doing flyovers. They were, you know, sending agents around the base. They had agents all over Las Vegas and in the strip clubs and stuff to try to, you know, seduce people who worked out there and contractors and stuff. So like they knew about all this stuff going on, and there's books on it. But
sorry, you're saying Lazar or Mr. Lear put Area 51 on the map, just to clarify?
Lear originally did, but Lazar was the one that like really, you know, blew it up because he was like the star physicist, and the way they portrayed him in Unsolved Mysteries and on all those shows and in the original Lazar tapes, you know, he sold it. You know what I mean? He was a salesman, you know, like Lear got the product together, but Lazar and Knapp were really the ones that sold it.
And sorry, before we go on, I just want to ask very quickly, if it's okay for you to speak on the individuals that worked with Lazar that did not want to go on the record. Could you say what their opinions were? Did they say, yeah, he might have been involved in some compartmentalized thing, or no, it's all BS?
Well, his ex-wife, he didn't want to go on the record, but she was basically said that, you know, he's a liar and that the whole story's, you know, a fraud, and that you know, he made it all up and everything. But his best friend Gene Huff, I've talked to him, and he stands by Bob all the way. You know, to this day, he says that Corbell did a crappy job on making the documentary, and that he wishes he didn't, because Corbell didn't even mention Gene Huff or John Lear. And even though he lived with John, Corbell lived and slept on John Lear's couch for like 5 years, man. So like,
So in other
it's
words,
kind of,
essentially, you got to cover every angle of it in order to present to the.
there's stuff that Corbell's leaving out of the story on purpose, and I think that speaks volumes about his intentions and within the community and his role and what he's doing. And
So you're not saying, just to get this correct, you're not saying that Corbell should debunk Lazar, but you're saying it's highly suspicious that Corbell is picking and choosing what to put and what not to put is very, very suspect relative to what agenda he might have.
He told us nothing new about the story, man. He just repeated the old story that we've been told and know for all these years, man. There's so much detail and so much inside, scoop on this. Like, the Element 115 article had all that's his entire intelligence download. That's all the scientific knowledge that he shared with us could have been borrowed from science. It was written in Scientific American 5 months before he shared it. So it's like, where's the meat and potatoes, man? I know people that like pretend to be people and can talk for hours about nothing, and there's plenty of them out there. And that will lead us into our next, topic too, about, I really like to, there's a lot of people that talk about nothing, like Elizondo and Chris Mellon, who, I'm very skeptical of myself, and I'm one of the few people on UFO Twitter that's still like outspoken and questioning their, their position and their roles and their behavior and their attitudes and within the community. One of the few people that's, everyone's like, no, how could you? They're on the same team. Why would you say bad things about them? And they've done great things to bring, ufology into the mainstream. And it's like, well, really, what have they done? Because in the scientific community, like they're bringing up all this stuff about poltergeists and ghosts and the Skinwalker Ranch thing, and all that. And that, I tell you what, the scientific community thinks about that.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you. One of the things I wanted to ask very strongly, which is that maybe you may not agree with Lou or be very skeptical of Mr. Elizondo. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when Mr. Elizondo says something like, for example, he believes that we as the masses, humanity, have shifted from science to scientism. Do you agree with him in that regard?
So I'd have to, I'm going to look up scientism.
Oh, sure. More so, I believe sort of following the belief of a biased ideology pertaining to a theory, but I might be thinking of something else.
Yeah, there is a lot of bias within science. I always say the revolution will not be televised.
Yep.
There's lots of people who've complained and brought up the issues with the modern peer review process and the modern, academic journals, what academic journals are, because they basically they charge scientists to publish their own work, give them hell to get it published. And then when any of it turns out to be true, they sell it and make enormous profits off it and give hardly anything back to the academic community. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And there's so many people that are like, why the fuck would I publish my great ideas when I could, go like Elon Musk and just go start a company and just build it and say, fuck all that bullshit.
So
you know what I mean? And make billions instead of just giving it away to this community that's just going to basically call me a fucking liar, call me like a pseudoscientist, give me hell to publish shit. And then when it turns out to be real, they're just going to exploit the fuck out of it and give me nothing.
Yeah. Right. So do you take issue with the peer review system in general in academia?
Yes, absolutely, man. Why do you think we are starting this whole new revolution of we have a bi-weekly conference. Okay, so no more like in-person conferences once a year that you have to pay, airfare and hotels to go attend. Now everyone sits in their underwear in their living room on Zoom and comes to these conferences. And I'm not saying in their underwear, but you know what I mean. It's the accessibility is on a whole nother level now, and it's like we're sharing. We don't have time to sit there and write a paper and wait for it to get published, man. We're like showing our experiments live and publishing our results right to YouTube live.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Yes.
we're sharing it with each other as a community. And you know how much faster we're getting shit done than they ever will?
Right, exactly. Well, speaking
we're
of
starting a new revolution with this stuff, man.
I mean, I couldn't agree more.
Technology.
I couldn't agree more, man. Speaking of which, it kind of made me think of something, sort of a two-pronged question. But do you, first off, are you familiar with the alleged Greada Treaty that Eisenhower signed in 1954? President Eisenhower he signed with.
Is this the one he signed with the aliens? Eisenhower supposedly met with the aliens.
Correct. Are you familiar with this? And if so, do you not believe it, but possibly?
Right. This was in Bill Cooper's book, man. He talked about it in Behold a Pale Horse, because he's like said that they tried to track down and they found that he had missing time during those dates. He apparently went to some 2-week dentist appointment or something like that.
And Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso also claimed that this particular set of gray aliens had leverage over Eisenhower and his administration because they knew that Eisenhower and his team did not want disclosure to go public. And that was
I'm not sure, but I know, like, is this related to the Project Serpo stuff?
Correct.
I know.
Yes.
Yeah, because all that came from Richard Doty.
Okay.
And that's where I think that's if Lazar was brought anywhere real to any facility and introduced to people, it was someone like Richard Doty or the OSI that was, setting Lazar up, to make him think that he was, because they knew Lazar was the kind of guy who would spill the beans, man. He's the last person, I think, from a psychological profiling and understanding how security clearances are granted, right? The guy had a real long history of burning people and having huge debts. He had like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debts that he left in Los Alamos when he left there and moved to Las Vegas.
Right.
He had, that's a big red flag. They don't like people that owe lots of money, because there's always the risk of espionage and that kind of stuff.
Right.
The other thing was, he drove a rocket car around, man. There's newspaper article clippings of him driving. Like, the guy was an attention-seeking. I see. You think that, you know what I mean? Like, he was. You don't drive a rocket car around unless you want attention, man. Like, in fact, all the engineers at Los Alamos were like, grilling him on his numbers and like, what's the point of having this rocket? It's so inefficient. It does nothing but like make noise and yeah, it's like, it's completely pointless. And they were like, completely unimpressed by it, but the media was like, oh my God, it's one of those things. It's like, he's getting all the wrong kinds of attention, and he's the first person he's talked to the media before. It's like they just knew, like, if they hired him for anything, it was intentional program set up to make him blab. And I wouldn't put it past these guys, Richard Doty, and what they were doing. During that time, they made a man go insane and like kill himself. Paul Benowitz, right?
Right. And Paul Benowitz also allegedly wrote that Project Beta document where he was observing a particular species of extraterrestrials in New Mexico.
Because the NSA was beaming him like messages through his radio equipment, and he was picking up things he thought it was aliens, and it was really the NSA like trying to tip him off, because he was like stumbled upon a top secret program and an operation that they didn't want, getting out.
Wow. So the reason I ask, and thank you for that, the reason I ask about the Greada Treaty, or the alleged Greada Treaty, is because it's been speculated, and I'm very careful to say this as if it's fact, because unless we have concrete evidence in front of us or proof, I don't want to say so. It's been speculated that the deal signed with the...
I'm skeptical, man. I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
This is like...
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, I did want to ask the deal allegedly signed was set to renew every 9 years, allegedly. Now, do you think that Mr. Elizondo and Mr. Mellon and a handful of others, putting aside Lazar for a second, do you think they are coming forward possibly because such treaties have expired, if you want to call it that, because there may be another extraterrestrial faction that is more positively oriented to support them coming forward? Not saying would not. I'm not.
That's an
Yeah.
interesting theory I hadn't thought of. I mean, I kind of like the idea that, who's this guy? So Dark Journalist has had, Daniel List, a Dark Journalist. He's done a number of episodes talking about, um, the whole TTSA thing and what he suspects it is and stuff.
Sorry, TTSA standing for?
So TTSA was to the Stars Academy, and it kind of came out in 2008 with Tom DeLonge, and it was Hal Puthoff, Steve Justice, Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and Jim Semivan, and that kind of fizzled out. They originally said they were going to build this craft and have a science division and bring out a lot of this technology, and then I think they backed off that, and now they're team. Of course, they broke up. We haven't really heard much from the others, but Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon have kind of come out on their own, and are now in this community. They've gotten a lot of attention, New York Times articles, and they've got a huge Twitter following, like three or four times the size that I have on Twitter. And I can't say anything negative about them, or I get an army of trolls, like coming and being like, defending their side and stuff, and including this one guy, Faceless Bureaucrat, who I'm pretty sure is Lou Elizondo's sock account, but I can't be so sure of that.
Well, if I may ask very quickly, pertaining to Mr. Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, I know what you're saying with regards to, like, I just listened on my walk the other day for a second or third time Joe Rogan's conversation with Christopher Mellon, and there's not much news of significance that you could take away from such a conversation. I mean,
it's interesting that he did call Lazar out, as saying that he didn't believe him because he was asked about that,
right?
And
yeah.
And he got some flack for that because the community is like, well, that's just low hanging fruit. Like, of course you could just say that, but he didn't really give us anything. Like my point is, I criticize Lazar, but then I'm like, well, look at all the other physics research and look at this real stuff that I found through my research. And if you really want to dig into it, we can get into gravito-electromagnetism, gravity probe B, the gravitomagnetic field of a rotating superconductor, and all the the theories and how far back that goes to torsion physics and the torsion Einstein-Cartan theory and the torsion tensor that apparently the Nazis were onto and were trying to develop at the end of World War II. And we can go into the real physics of this stuff and not just talk about element 115. And I just question what these guys are
if they're
doing
controlled opposition.
Because the scientific division of this whole operation, apparently ATIP was run by Lou Elizondo, and they hired a couple scientists to do some research.
Sorry, just for the audience, I want to clarify. ATIP stands for Advanced Aerospace Identification
Threat
Identification Program. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So, but I just wanted to add to that super quickly. Do you think that, and I'm not trying to defend them at all, just trying to play the other side of things here. Do you think that them walking up to that metaphorical line but not crossing it, again, a lot of people that defend them very strongly say, oh, well, they're NDAs, things like that. But do you think just them coming forward, although not necessarily offering anything of any new relevancy, is in and of itself, like that action of them coming forward may help push things forward? Do you think that's a legitimate thing they're doing?
The timing was just interesting. It was right around the Bob Lazar documentary being released on Netflix, and like right before that, actually 3 or 4 months before that, October.
Right.
And they were claiming that they were going to build a craft, and they were claiming to bring a lot of this information and technology out. And there was a lot of interesting stuff that, you know, it was published and studied in under the OSAP program, which was ATIP's scientific, you know,
Jacques Vallée was a consultant for the database on OSAP, if I'm not mistaken.
He was. Oh, that's interesting. So,
well, that's
yeah,
sorry, that's according to Skinwalkers at the Pentagon book, depending on how you take that. That's a new book very recently. A lot of people criticized it, a lot of people praised it. So
yeah, I don't know what the issue is with the Skinwalker Ranch and bringing that into the narrative, but I have a feeling my take on that is it's related to the electronics warfare testing range. That basically the electronic warfare testing is what we're called ECCMs, or electronic countermeasures. You know, and I interviewed I interviewed TD Barnes, who's like the head guy out at Area 51, and he thinks that all these pilots, the Nimitz encounters, and all those pilots are seeing is our own electronic warfare technology. It's spoofing technology. They can literally make
everything.
He says that we have spoofing technology that's incredibly deceiving. And he says that we can create, you know, physical objects that appear in real air and appear on radar. And so when you're talking about a technology like that, then these radar signatures of these things doing 90-degree angles, you know, it's no longer like, wait a minute, is this a real is this real? Or is this, you know, something that they're creating with this electronic warfare technology and the spoofing that they have? And these programs go back to Project Palladium and Project Nemesis, are two of the ones that he can talk about, but he said that there's stuff that he knows about that he can't really talk about. And he just says that these pilots aren't seeing what they think they're seeing. And I thought that was amazing, coming from the head of special projects out of Area 51 saying that. And it's interesting, certainly, that a lot of these sightings occur in these electronic warfare testing ranges, like the SoCal range in the off of San Clemente Island and off of Pendleton Naval Base, you know, there in California, off the coast of San Diego.
But sorry, before you go on, you just said like 50 things. I know that my audience is going to want me to ask you if that's cool. Project Bluebeam, the whole concept that there may be some type of faked or staged invasion of some kind. I personally don't subscribe to there being like one big event per se, but do you think that some of that technology could be categorized as blue beam tech? I mean, that's quite a vague term, but
it's certainly the idea of the blue beam relates to the spectrum of the lasers that they're using. Right. And the more convincing holograms are this blue spectrum, because they can also do colored, you know, combinations of red, green, and blue to create. I believe they could create really realistic visual displays, you know, of any color that they wanted. But blue beam is certainly, you know, these ideas go back. You know, people were talking about this idea of using that they could use lasers to project holograms and project things in the sky. So this idea is not very new. But I think that the technology and how far it's gotten and how sophisticated it is not known to the public.
Yeah, I concur, and I would strongly agree. And I also think Jacques Vallée believes that whether it's human or not, he believes that, again, if you go by with what he said with James Fox on Rogan's podcast about a year ago, he thinks that this phenomenon is trying to teach us something. That these motherships seem to be manifesting smaller objects that are relative to an individual's perception, rather than, you know, everyone sees the same thing. A handful of people might see a red orb. Others will see a flying, like a disc. In that regard, do you subscribe to that? Not necessarily believe it, but subscribe to that.
Well, when you talk about when you understand how optics works, you know, how you see an object, and you understand what's called collimated emissions. And collimated means that it points vectored directly towards a certain target. So if you use collimated emissions and understand, you know, dissipative collimation, then you could potentially project different images at different angles, so different people would see different things. because if you stood here, you'd be getting a different optical picture through the collimated radiation
Now,
signal.
if I'm before we move on, if I may ask, do you believe, granted, given the technology, whether it's public or secret, that the United States government and the army has, do you believe that how can I word this? What piece of evidence or pieces of evidence suggest to you that a lot of the craft seen, whether now or back then, is of extraterrestrial origin and not of, again, the technology you just spoke of that sort of, holographic, whatever, you know, uh, makes it work type of apparatus?
Yeah, well, like the first lasers didn't exist till I think like the 50s or 60s, like the
Mm,
first experimental ones, and then practical ones like not until the 60s, right? They
right.
were huge and stuff. So the idea that these Foo Fighters that were seen during World War II were like a projected technology, like they didn't, I don't know, there's quite a few arguments that we didn't have quite the technology for that then.
Fair. Yeah.
And then there's other ideas. People said, well, they're balloons, with electrodes attached, or there's like lots of crazy theories, and hot air balloons or Chinese lanterns are an older technology that have been around for a while. That if you had a couple Chinese lanterns back in the day, you'd probably make some UFO sightings, because people wouldn't have anything to, if they didn't know what a Chinese lantern was, you know,
do
they
you
got to
do
see,
oh,
so
sorry.
like there's lots of mundane explanations for aerial phenomenon, but I don't think it's, I think that if we are being visited, it's going to be something like, Who Watches the Watchers from Star Trek, where they're not going to, I don't know, but then again, you have all these crazy experiencer stories, but there's never proof. There's never like this hard, definitive evidence like we had with Angeli the other night, where I'm like, it's like it's just a story until I can go out there to this cave and see these aliens myself, or bring a camera, or it's just a story, and how does that feel to, how does that feel to a person, say that they really experienced something, say that you were
Right.
really abducted, and then you go and tell people and no one believes you.
Do
It's
you
like,
oh yeah, sorry.
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask. Do you? I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Do you believe, speaking on this topic, allegedly Roswell was not the first crash? Again, that's very speculative. But do you believe Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, who said that things like Kevlar, fiber optics, the integrated circuit, directly came from reverse engineering the material from Roswell, the crash?
No, because I studied physics and solid state physics history, and I understood that the whole theory behind solid state semiconductors, and that led to the transistors development, came from Walter Schottky and a
In the
lot of these other
30s.
guys in the 30s and 20s, even going back. So
Right.
there's a lot of science. A lot of this can be traced back to very human and terrestrial origins, and I didn't like that, because I thought it's like an insult to science, and it's insult to history, and it's insult to the humans that spent their entire lives developing this technology, for aliens to get credit for it.
Mm,
You
fair,
know what I
very
mean? It's
fair,
like
very fair.
that kind of burns me up about, like a lot of that stuff, because there's nothing that he mentions in that book that I haven't been able to go back and find, origins for that, like someone figured this out or did it way before, any of these, and way before Aztec, way before, like we have fiber optic. The first guy to make fiber optic strands, like was in the late 1800s, and he made like
Right.
decorated his whole like apartment with them and stuff, and it caught on in a number of places. So they were making fiber optics. They didn't use them for signals processing and sending signals and stuff
Right.
until much later. But I would have expected, if he was really briefed on this stuff. I mean, his book came out in 97. Fouché
Yeah.
came out a year later and talked about metamaterials and quasi-crystals. Why wasn't that stuff mentioned in Corso's book?
That's a
You know
very
what I
good.
mean?
So speaking of which,
That's
is there anything of significance that is not explainable to a terrestrial explanation? in your time, many years of research, is there anything where you go, pardon my English, you're like, holy fuck, like I can't explain this type thing?
You know, even the pyramids, they're not perfect. There are, a little bit off, but again, we wouldn't be able to hire a contractor to build those today. I don't know
Hmm.
how we do it. It would cost so much money, and it would be such a engineering fiasco. Um, and then you look at some of those temples in India and the stone carving, and there's a whole temple that was carved right out of solid rock. The whole thing's made out of solid rock, and it's dug right into a hole in the ground. Like the temple was like carved out around, and then they have that metallurgy from ancient times that has stood the test of time. They've discovered some interesting things, and I think maybe we're not giving ourselves enough credit as humans for
Mm.
ingenuity and our abilities.
Right.
um, but then again, it's like maybe we are just a bunch of idiots, and aliens had to do everything for us. I
um,
don't see any evidence for it, man. Like
right.
I think people are great, man, and people can do amazing things if they put their minds to it. And
Right.
there's a lot of power in belief and believing in yourself.
So speaking with respects to, again, the pyramids, Stonehenge, the structures in India, there's been some people that speculate this was done via something called acoustic levitation. Now, I did want to ask, do you believe there to be different forms of, I guess you could say, propulsion of anti-gravity for different? I mean, it's been speculated that different, whether it's human or not, different craft scene seem to have different, in some cases, propulsion systems or different sources of energy. Maybe not always the case, but do you, I mean, it's been speculated as well that the vast majority of UAP sightings these days are in fact human and military. Do you believe there are different forms of propulsion based on your research that could be used at a secretive level or otherwise?
I don't see acoustic levitation being powerful enough. Like normally when you
Sorry,
see
not that specifically, just in general though.
I'm just thinking of like, you know, and yeah, there's lots of different ways to do things. There's lots of different theories about how to do things. Like one of the ideas was that, you shine the right frequency light inside of the silica-based rock, and it will create muon, anti-muon pairs, and that the anti-muons can somehow be, coordinated to create enough antimatter to lift the object or create what's called the quantum foam. um, there's lots of theories and ideas about that, but I haven't seen anything put into practice or actually done or demonstrated. Normally acoustic levitation is done with like styrofoam balls, like really lightweight stuff, man. We're
Right.
talking about 2.5 ton blocks,
Right.
of sandstone. So maybe it is the sandstone was used because of the crystal structure of the material. That might have had something to do with it. Or they might have just used like leverage and brute force. And there's a lot of engineers that like have devised different ways, using leverage that you could have built these things. Just
Are you of the belief, sir, that if, for example, if there were to be species observing us to whatever extent or metric, that if they were so substantially advanced, I don't want to put a time frame on it as how advanced they could be, but if they were genuinely far more advanced than us, that we would never know, that they could walk among us? Again, there's been speculation of, as they call them, skin suits, and that gentleman from Area 51,
yeah.
saying things that he could say. We see now, for example, ex-CIA officials that were involved in the disguise department back in the 70s and 80s can only now speak on things that were so,
Yeah, like the
well
Frank
done.
Strangers at the
Yes,
Pentagon, who's
yes,
supposedly the alien. And you know what?
right.
I've never seen Hillary Clinton take a DNA test.
Huh. Fair enough.
No, I'm
Fair
just
enough.
I'm just I always make Hillary Clinton jokes. Like I made one with Angelique the other night, and it was fun. It was pretty good.
Do you
It was
think though, if that, of course there's the slip ups and things like this that some have speculated, but like you said, there's not enough to say this is proof, concrete fact. But do you think if they were that advanced, they would be able to hide themselves well enough that we would just be like, holy shit, like we didn't have any idea that guy walking down the street turned out to be
I
one of them?
think Hillary Clinton, you could pull her mask off. and there would probably be some scaly skin under there.
So I don't mean any disrespect. Is that a joke or are you serious?
I'm just
Oh.
I'm getting Alex Jones on you, man.
I
Sorry.
was gonna say,
I got all like, I was all serious up until this point.
that's why I had to ask, just to make sure.
Yeah, man. I think it could be possible, man.
And so,
It's like,
I'm not asking for confirmation bias.
There
I'm
was
just
a couple
asking,
times, during this whole pandemic where I wasn't, totally convinced that the aliens weren't behind it all. But that gets into that, I get down that QAnon like crazy rabbit hole. Like that's like the QAnon level crazy, where it's like, all right, I just have to abandon all of my reality here now. Because they're giving away a vaccine that's going to kill everyone on the planet, right? Oh, they're killing people with the vaccine. That's so all my family's going to die, and all the people that were obedient and took it are going to perish, and that's going to leave all the rebellious people who don't follow the rules left behind. That doesn't make any sense. Sorry, it's like so there's a lot of like craziness out there. Alex Jones, right? Speaking of Alex Jones, he used to call David Icke out as being this guy who did all this great research on the bloodlines of the Illuminati and the history of these banking families that go back, centuries,
right?
And how they've been in control of everything on the planet, for and all the information on the planet too, like through the intelligence networks who've always worked for the banks, and and this whole big conspiracy scheme of how it's all connected at the top. These people live in this whole secret society world where it's completely, it's completely run, and things are run completely differently than we would even understand it. And maybe they are planning to kill everyone but themselves so that they can retake over the world, repopulate the world. That's some crazy conspiracy theories out there. But he used to call David Icke the turd in the punch bowl. For taking all that and then being like, well, they're protecting their bloodlines because they're reptilian aliens, and that was like his whole like, I don't know, that was like the whole hang up point for me, where it's like, yeah, I can see all this research, I can see all this hard evidence of this stuff, but when you get to the calling them all reptilian aliens and using that as the explanation for why they're so messed up and doing the stuff that they're doing, I'm like, isn't like their banking interests and the inbreeding enough?
Right. Fair enough. Now, do you subscribe to that's a very good point. Do you subscribe to any possibility or potentiality of there being a secret space program of there's been I wanted to.
On that note, I have to grab another beer once.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'll pause it.
We're gonna do secret.
So the secret space program, do you believe there to be a potential, again, because we see, for example, in physics, in theoretical physics, if I'm not mistaken, things like I guess you could say time travel and what have you, in theory, are possible. It's just that on the surface, at least, we don't have the equipment to do so, and or understand how to make equipment to do so. Do you believe there being a secret space program? There's been some people that have, taken very, especially nowadays, digitized telescopes, very advanced ones, pointed it towards the moon. And I mean, you see some objects seeming like they're coming in and out of certain craters, but I'm not trying to, make that the end all be all. But
so first off, I just want to start off saying that most of the secret space program whistleblowers like out there,
right.
There's a lot of people that use SSP as like a way to sell us their stories. They're grifters, and they're not telling the truth. They didn't.
I can agree with that. Yep.
All right. There's a lot of people who use that to sell nonsense. All right, and they're fraudsters and they're grifters, and don't give them your money, and don't, I don't know. You can watch them if you want. It's entertaining and stuff sometimes. But there is a secret space program. There was a secret space program. It was called the Redstone Arsenal, and it was part of Operation Paperclip, where we brought a whole bunch of Nazi rocket scientists over here to start our space program. And so there was, over 100 of them. I forget how many exactly were brought over, the exact number. There's some pictures of, groups of them together. at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. A lot of their family members are surviving, still live there today, and are part of the current space program and at NASA Marshall there. So yeah, there's also a secret space program called the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, and they launch spy satellites into space to and they handle all the Kennen 2 and the Kennen spy satellites, KENAN or Kennen. I don't know.
So when you very fair points, when you see, for example, the former Israeli space defense minister or the former Canadian minister Paul Hellyer, when they say things like, for example, I believe Mr. Hellyer's passed away now, but when they say things like, again, or Boyd Bushman, who used to work at Lockheed Martin, with the patents and all that, seemingly to substantiate his work there, on and making that video on his deathbed saying, we've got bases on Mars working with ETs, we got bases on the moon. We see, for example, the leak from, for example, if I pull up very quickly here, my apologies, in 2016, WikiLeaks leaked emails where astronaut Edgar Mitchell wrote to former White House Chief of Staff John Podesta that his team of scientists work with extraterrestrial intelligence. I know this is not proof. I fully get that. But when you see such individuals making these statements and claims, I would like to think there's a consistency there, in the sense that these are all highly respected individuals with, high top secret clearances and all that. So when you see Paul Hellyer, the former Israeli space defense minister, Edgar Mitchell, what do you take away from that? And I'm not trying to put you in a corner or anything. I'm just genuinely asking.
Well, a lot of these people haven't, they haven't all said confirming things, so let's like, they've said different things,
Right.
about different aspects of what they were exposed to. Edgar Mitchell was just saying that, he saw UFOs and that they were told not to talk about him, and that he thinks that, we're definitely not alone, and that the government has been covering it up through NASA for years. Then you have, Paul Hellyer, the Canadian, engineer there, saying that, I forget what Paul Hellyer said, but yeah, what was the other guy was the Israeli defense minister there, saying that there's
Correct.
this galactic alliance and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I
mean, and sorry, Bill Clinton, Obama, they seem to be, coincidentally, ironically enough, around the same period of time, they're all able to suddenly speak on not ETs, but UFOs. And you have, not to say that we should take Bill Clinton's word now compared to before, but people like him and Obama are saying, we may define this as constitute another form of life. Former CIA director Brennan, I know there's no proof. They're not bringing proof. They're just words.
It's interesting because there's definitely some initiative that's going on to bring soft disclosure out, with,
okay,
because you have former White House people that, they were interested in this to begin with, and I think a lot of this stuff started actually under John Podesta, because didn't Tom DeLonge reach out to John Podesta? It was in the WikiLeaks emails.
I think so.
He reached out, and I think that they wanted to set this up, and they went looking for ways and brought this team of individuals together to do this. And it's interesting who they chose and what their, sort of takes are and stuff. Hal Puthoff, I've heard, is not doing too well either right now. I heard he's sick, and having a lot of health problems. But essentially, Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis were the main guys working, who did like a lot of the science research and put a lot of the reports together for the Defense Intelligence Agency under that ATIP program. And I think that was started by, Senator Reid.
Yep.
In an attempt to, well, I think he was aware that there were other programs going on in the government that he couldn't have access, that
were not reporting to Congress,
and that weren't reporting to Congress. So he created this program to sort of blow. I think they created that whole ATIP, OSAP, BAS programs pry the lid off the real stuff. Um,
Makes sense. Okay.
you know what? Because I feel like it was like people that were, within the government that had some idea of these other deeper programs, and how intertwined and compartmentalized and stovepiped this stuff really was, that they were going to have difficulty bringing it out. So Bigelow, spearheaded this with Bigelow Aerospace,
Robert
and he
Bigelow, yeah.
created, he created that whole facility that was supposed to receive UFO debris to analyze it and be able to, tell what it is and reverse engineer it. They were trying hard to get the UFO debris that the government might have, and the government wouldn't give it up. They had some trouble with a couple contracts that they had going on with NASA, which was their only source of income really at the aerospace company. I think that Bigelow is a billionaire, and he sunk a lot of his own money into this to try to get answers, but he just didn't. He had some good insights, man. I think that Bigelow's got a lot of answers, but he's not sharing a lot of that stuff publicly. They're not talking about that stuff. I mean, it's in the FOIAs. You can find the documentation on it. It's on like Black Vault, but it's not well advertised, and nobody's reading it and talking about it except a handful of scientists in the scientific community.
Right. Now, do you believe the Admiral Wilson, Dr. Eric Davis memos there from Edgar Mitchell's estate? Do you believe that they're legitimate, rather?
The Wilson documents there, I think that there's so much better places to look. Eric Davis, he's been an inside guy on a lot of these things, but it's almost like he's using this security clearance as it's more advantageous to him to like cite his security clearance for why he can't talk about it than him to just flat out and deny it, because it makes him look like he's got more inside knowledge and is more important and bigger than he really is. You know what I mean? So it's like, so I have a lot of people that are accusing him of, and Eric Davis is an interesting guy, and I would love for him to come and present on APEC and talk to us. How Putoff would have been great too, but he's really getting he's really not in a good health right now, and I don't know how much longer he's going to be around. And I don't know if he's really in the condition to give an interview of this kind of.
Did you happen to see Mr. Greenstreet's outtakes with Davis?
Mr. Green, I don't know if I've seen that. I've seen a lot of stuff with Davis. I've seen a lot of like interviews with him.
He said he couldn't comment. Mr. Davis seemed to get quite the clip went on Twitter, got deleted, came back, and then I have a screen recording of it.
I think I've seen it. He gets super nervous, and he's like no, I can't speak.
Yes, yeah.
I've seen that and heard that. And it's, again, he's not telling us anything. Really, it seems like a big distraction for people to talk about nothing but dance around the real meat and potatoes, which is all in Eric Davis's papers that were published for the Defense Intelligence Agency and the summary reports for Bigelow Aerospace and Bass. There's sub papers on all those. People have that 38 papers that came out. I remember that was the last thing I seen from George Knapp and that whole crew was that 38 papers that came out with the Stephen Aftergood FOIA that talked about those 38 different things that were studied under the ATIP program for the scientific part of it.
Right.
But the thing they don't point out is that like almost each one of those is like there's a subdirectory with like sub-paper, sub-summaries reports that were written for the Defense Intelligence Agency under all those. And there's a lot of dense technical material there, which is not getting the ear of the scientific community. It's not getting the eye of the scientific community.
This is what I was trying to get at earlier. Do you think there is again, Majestic 12, Zodiac, or a loose conglomerate of rogue individuals in the government or academia that are working together?
This makes me wonder, right? Because look, back in the day, they did have that. Okay. It was a very, very much alleged that they had an MJ-12, right?
Yeah,
right. And the people that were involved with that were a very interesting group of individuals. They had the head of MIT, Vannevar Bush.
Yep.
They had one of the heads at Harvard, Dr. Menzel.
Right.
And they had so they had like these top figures from academia kind of take control of the subject and control the narrative. And I was worried that was what might happen. I had really high hopes for Galileo project with Dr. Avi Loeb up at Harvard.
Mm.
And, he has refused. He's given invitations to speak on people with on these Irish podcasts with 2,000 subscribers, but he wouldn't subscribe. He wouldn't come onto my channel and give an interview with a bunch of technical scientists who are going to really grill him and ask him a bunch of and really educate him on this field too. But he didn't want to do that. He avoided that, which was a huge surprise to me. And then he went on Louis Jimenez's channel there with the Unidentified Celebrity Review.
Yes.
And he pledged that Galileo project was going to be free from the government, and they were going to be completely separate from the government. They wouldn't get involved with the government or people from the government.
Right.
And then they just recently announced that they teamed up with Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon.
Well, this is the big. I know what you're speaking on, because this is the big thing. These are former, or in some cases, people speculate still government officials. So what to what credibility does that reach, right? Well, that sort of takes me to
look, yeah. Ed Fouché, right? I'm gonna tell you, he received his pension up until he died, and he went to the VA hospital, and he was covered under his military benefits. Okay,
right. Despite
being this whistleblower who came out and talked, right. So either he was given sanction to do that afterwards. Yeah. But what happened with Lou Elizondo is he had like a year left to go before he was going to get his pension, and he said he gave it all up to come out and be this hero. And that doesn't make any sense, man. It's like you would have just waited another year and get your pension, and then you could have come out and talked and then still gotten so I just feel like it doesn't make sense. I don't see, is he worried? I know he has a couple patents that he supposedly patented. Those might have been gifted to him as something, they gave, but we'll give you this that you can make money off of if you come out and be our guy. It's always like.
Sorry, you're speaking on Lou?
I'm just trying to understand Lou's backdoor. We're out there struggling to pay his rent because he's became a whistleblower, and he's got all this popularity and fanfare and tons of support from people, and I'm just wondering what his motivations were to quit. There's so many questions.
If he were to provide, I hear you. And if he were to provide, again, not to defend him, just to play devil's advocate, if he were to provide some type of reason down the road that would make logical sense relative to the timing he left, would you be inclined to believe him, or would you still think, as they say, once a government, once a spy, always a spy, that type of thing?
Yeah, I think once a spy, always a spy. And I think that, there's a reason why he won't go on Dark Journalist or people like my channel, and he gives a lot of these softball interviews to people who really don't know the right questions to ask, or don't want to lose, don't want to ask the right questions out of fear of losing their audience. And okay. I think there's a lot of that going on. It's like we should be skeptical of all these guys, especially guys like Lou Elizondo, who a former counterintelligence agent. The guy can talk. He can talk for hours about nothing, and he's super interesting to listen to. But you really not learn. I'm like, I realized I watched this whole interview and I didn't learn a heck of a lot of anything about anything that I didn't already know. That it's like, yeah, the government studies this stuff, and we had a program, and I was the director of that program, and right. It's all like these scripted answers that are that don't ask the right questions, don't peer into the science. Should have been the focus of that whole TTSA. They had a whole science and technology division when they first had the outset.
Yes. So if I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if I were to say, for example, I'm Lou Elizondo, and I say, okay, listen, you know what, Jeremy, I want to come on. What, if you can, again, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Lots of these, look, Angelie, I give her props because I'm a skeptic, and for her to come on with me and Steve Cambion and talk to us openly was like, as a shock, because if she's lying, she wouldn't do that. So she really believes this happened. You know what I mean? Like,
what would be the question or questions, the main ones you would ask Lou if you were to come on? I mean, I don't mean, again, maybe you don't have the questions prepared in front of you, but what are the things you'd want to ask him that the other podcasters are not?
Well, Kurt Jamungal was kind enough to reach out to me before he interviewed Lou last, and I wasn't. I wish I had come up with a whole bunch more questions, but the thing is, I felt like last time I bogged him down with too many questions, and I wanted to just hit one specific one that would really, like that was really been a problem that I'm struggling with is the whole Atoms project that he created, where they went and collected UFO debris from the public. And then they were going to analyze that and come up with like this whole thing. And then they talked about this waveguide material that was terahertz active, and that they needed terahertz to activate it. And the only lab with the terahertz capabilities was the US Army. And so that's why they signed that CRADA agreement with the US Army and gave that material back to the military. It just seemed like, and they paid big money. I think that was Arts Parts or something. It ended up being, it was something, the piece ended up being from Linda Moulton Howe, who had gotten it, and from Art Bell, and so there's this whole like controversy about the history behind, and also the chain of custody of the sample itself to begin with, and the claims that were being made around it. But apparently it just boggles my mind, like that they collected all these samples from the public and then gave them back to the military, but they also gave them back to the wrong branch of the military, because the Air Force has the best terahertz and photonics lab at Wright State University of all. They have all the equipment right there at the US Air Force.
Deliberate misappropriation?
I thought it looked to me like this is like sleight of hand. It's like, look, all right, well, look over here. These are the guys that have the equipment and the ones that can do this stuff, so you won't pay attention to the research that they're doing over at AFIT, the Air Force.
Do you think that's part of the? You think that's part of the compartmentalization, the deliberate misappropriation of such
sleight
objects?
Of hand is sleight of hand. That's a direct intelligence move right there.
Right.
That's what I saw, and the fact that there's guys who worked at that lab, and I talked about these stories, and that guy's in jail. He just got sentenced to a year in jail out in Ohio for leaking 1,000-page of classified documents. And I don't know where those leaks ended up, but I definitely will say I learned quite a bit from reading his PhD thesis and some of his other published works that were publicly available. So thank you OSI for getting involved in that. So there's we're like we talk about real leaks and real information, man. Like these people are doing jail. These people are doing jail time right now.
Right. Is there I just have 3 more questions for you, if that's all right, if you got the time.
His name's Isaac Kemp from Dayton, Ohio, if you want to look him up.
Isaac Kemp?
Yep. IZAAKKEMP.
Isaac Kemp. Thank you very much. So do you one of the things I wanted to ask as well too was the Christopher Mellon server leak, and I say that sometimes with air quotes because it has to do with his private company server pertaining to the bullet points about human cognitive interface, the ability to penetrate solid surfaces and things like that. Do you, I mean, it's ironic enough, we seem to learn more from these quote unquote leaks than the actual UAP reports back in the summer. Do you subscribe to any of this? Like, I mean, Christopher Mellon saying like, oh, I can't comment on that. And like you said, these guys could talk for 10 hours and tell you nothing. Do you?
Right. They can't comment on any of it.
Do you find? Right.
Research this stuff.
Sort of a multi-pronged question, 2-pronged question. Do you believe this the science exists for this document or piece of slideshow to be leaked? And secondly, do you God damn it, I forgot the second part. Brain fart, excuse me, but I'll remember.
Where can we find that Chris Mellon leak?
Oh, let me hold on a second. I think I can pull it up for you. And I can send it in the
missing ATIP slides.
Is
this on Reddit?
It's definitely on Reddit. Let me just confirm with you there. Correct. ATIP sub-focus areas. The science exists for an enemy of the United States to manipulate both physical and cognitive environments in order to penetrate U.S. facilities, influence decision makers, psychotronic weapons, penetration of solid surfaces, cognitive human interface, instantaneous sensor, the whole thing. Do you see this as a distraction? Do you see this as a soft disclosure?
this is like stuff that they won't, watch. You ask him about this publicly in an interview, and he's going to squirm. He's probably not going to want to talk about this stuff too deeply. But there's a project, MK Ultra is a continuing project. It was never shut down. It's still going. It's experimental mind control, and they've learned so much about the psychology and manipulation and mind control. It's really quite scary. But one of the sub projects under MK Ultra was a sub project called Subproject 68, and that is the one that dealt with electronic warfare technologies and psychotronic warfare and psychotronic weapons. So this was actually a whole subdivision of Project Rainbow as well, too, which Project Rainbow was the CIA's operation to map out the entire electromagnetic frequency spectrum and the resonance or radio response of every different type of material to those frequencies. So different materials had different radio responses. So they wanted to find materials that were, like ferroelectric materials like barium titanate that were really good for radar reflection and absorption properties versus, what kind of paint they could, make that would be less radar reflective or more radar absorbent. So this was a whole thing, but there was a whole sub project under Project Rainbow to map out the part of the electromagnetic frequency spectrum that's bioactive or biologically active or psychotronically active specifically.
Right.
So they found that certain ELF frequencies induced, like states, so they could make someone sleepy, by inducing that, that deep gamma state or whatever, or they could make them really alert by pumping them with alpha.
Right. So you believe what's in those slides to be at least theoretically possible?
There's documentation on this, and if people want to look it up, they can go to icnirp.org, and that's the International Council on Non-Ionizing Radiation. And
cool, very cool.
And this is non-ionizing radiation, so it's beneath ultraviolet. It's a lot of it's in the infrared range, and when you create peaks and certain types of signals, you can and microwave also, a lot of it's microwave active, such as the microwave auditory effect, if you're familiar with that. So this document, if you look up on the Council of Non-Ionizing Radiation, it will give you a bibliography of all the scientific studies that have been done, and it will show you all the bad frequencies. It will show you what those bad frequencies can do.
Okay.
And this is for protecting people. This is not so you can go and build a weapon to go and mess people up. So just put that out there. Like, not well talked about, because in the wrong hands, this type of knowledge is dangerous. But it's important, I think, for everyone to know this, because this knowledge is readily available to a lot of dangerous people already. And in order to protect yourselves from them, it helps to be, equipped with that knowledge and that understanding that there are frequencies that you can generate with transmitters, and that, if targeted on humans, can have adverse effects. The microwave auditory effect, they can plant, using these pulses of microwaves, they can make voices inside your head. You can hear actual voices in your eardrum.
Wow. Yeah.
And they can make voices inside your heads. So they can do a lot of really messed up, that's just one example. That I'm sure there's others, and a lot of it's a less exact science, because there's different effects on different people. Of course,
right.
We have different size, different geometry, different biometrics, different size skulls, different,
Right. Yes.
So certain resonances are going to work on someone else differently than they work on a different person. So
right. So I remembered my second question. Is there anything that, because you've been doing this for so long, is there anything that any official with credibility has told you off the record that obviously you cannot say publicly, that made you go, holy crap, like, okay, this is the phenomenon is quite legitimate, at least based on what they've told me? ETs probably, not definitely, but probably exist. Is there anything off the record that just a simple yes or no you've been told that's like, yeah, I got this?
I mean, Ed Fouché said a lot of crazy things. I don't know if it, is when he got really, really drunk, if he opened up to me or whether he, you know,
Right.
just got, fell off the wagon or whatever. But he told me
Right.
that he flew on the moon to on the TR-3B one time. That he flew on it, and that they went on a mission to the moon and back. And that he never told that story before, but I don't know if I believe that, or what he what that was about. But I was like, that was kind of hard one for me to swallow
Did
without
he
any
mention
evidence and
any
that stuff.
potential
But
structures on the moon? Did he get into any detail of that, or it's not, you don't want to comment on?
yeah, I wanted to ask him more specific missions, like, well, did you go? Was it the dark side of the moon? Did you go to
Right.
was there a base that you went to? But
Yeah.
I kind of just was like so stunned. I didn't want to like get into it. I guess I don't know,
Right.
but also was like I felt like he would have been insulted if I started, questioning him on it. And but then again, it's like, well, maybe he did make it up, but I
Wow.
don't know. The thing is, right? I've never been able to explain how. Like, he must have either been. I think he knew Hal Puthoff, and Hal Puthoff is the one that was telling him about the quasi-crystals and metamaterials stuff.
Okay.
Um, Even though I've never really heard Hal talk too much about the quasi-crystal stuff, it's I don't know, it's super interesting that to try to unravel now years later. And I think that those materials are definitely the future of where a lot of this stuff is going. I found out that metamaterials, certain types of metamaterials can um, there's a whole book called excitons, and it's these particles that occur inside of materials when you shine light into them. So you create these, you can trap light and do a lot of weird things with it. And this is where I think the technology is really headed, and where a lot of our research is based on these types of materials, where you can trap light and create what are called polariton exciton pairs. And within the polaritons, you can create what are called polariton condensates, and that's called condensed light. And that's where you can have room temperature superconductors and a lot of other really interesting physics phenomenon that occurs, because there's a lot to be said of the science of entanglement.
Right. Now I did, speaking of which, this is part actually my second last question I wanted to ask. Ionized air pockets. You having a much better understanding than
Yeah.
myself with ionized air pockets, it's been alleged that in a lot of these, again, I say alleged very carefully, extraterrestrial bases, they ionize the air pockets above those hidden bases. Could you see why that would be the case? And if so, apparently it's multi-purposed, but for the reasons why they do it. But could you see this being a logical thing to do?
Yeah, it looks like maybe radar reflection absorption kind of it would definitely make you more invisible to, electromagnetic scanning and stuff like that.
Okay.
But not that the electromagnetic scanning wouldn't detect this large electric field right there, so it's kind of like giving yourself away too. I think
Mm,
there's other ways that they could do it more passively with metamaterials and cloaking, and maybe even making holograms, you know. Uh, but again, that technology is not, I don't know if that we're there yet with that kind of level of it. We
sure.
can create holograms at night of like these shining balls of light and stuff.
Mm,
And I know that they actually that there's ones that show them during the day. You can actually see the balls of light in the sky during the day, during daylight. So it works in daylight too.
right.
Um, but as far as
I mean,
there's also a lot
hypothetically,
of there's also
yeah.
propulsion technologies based on this. NASA did a lot of research on pulse plasmas, and like where they energize this, ionize the gas and create a plasma, and then they pulse it. Um,
Right.
in fact, they've abandoned the scramjet and ramjet engines for hypersonic jet engines, and they've realized that putting the engine on the outside of the craft and using these plasmas to drive air currents over the craft are much more effective than trying to jam it through a tube.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but would you see in a hypothetical world the reason for why these beings would do that? Why they would not always, but in many cases, allegedly, many cases, ionize the air surrounding their base, their hidden base?
Yeah, I don't know about the base, the stationary base, but I know why they do
Right.
it around I know why they do it around their craft, and that goes back to this guy named Lake Marabou at Rensselaer Polytech, and Marabou, Myrabo, left there and did a lot of work for NASA and also classified work for that he's still under contract for and can't talk about till 2027 apparently. Because it's related to a lot of this hypersonic missile systems and hypersonic weapons technologies that they're doing
Do
with
you
it now.
right? Do you believe? This is my final sort of two-pronged question, if that's cool. Do you believe there is one group or maybe a handful of different factions of groups of humans, and it may be in some cases ETs, and maybe believe is the wrong word, subscribe to the possibility of there being, like when we talked about, the sleight of hand move. Oh, this piece of metallurgy just went missing. Like Jacques Vallée said on Rogan last year, he's like, these things have a funny way of going missing and going missing and ending up in other labs in the country. Do you think there's one or maybe a handful of groups, not necessarily, they meet every Friday in the shadows to discuss what to do, but just, very strongly controlling, again, like why certain things aren't talked about in at Harvard, at Stanford, why they aren't on the front page of Scientific America? Do you think there's a group that says like, no, this isn't getting out to, like, right at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. It's admitted to, and there's documentation on it. It's called Operation Paperclip. And the CIA has set that up in the 50s to control the news cycles, to make sure that unfriendly news, like that they could control the news.
Yeah.
And that's been reflected in the past years with the 90% buy-up of all the small media companies for the big establishments and the big six, right? The six big, the big six are the big six companies that own all of our media. 90% of like the content that you consume is controlled by just six people.
That's fucked. Pardon my English.
Okay?
That's yeah.
That's reality. It's not a conspiracy. It's fucking fact, bro. Like if you don't believe that, then you're stupid and you haven't done your research. Right. I'm sorry. Like, go look it up.
It's right there.
It's legit. Operation Mockingbird. And these Rockefeller foundations set up all these institutions. They hired they set up these institutions and hired like brand new PhDs, back in the 50s, that are like all retired and replaced now with new PhDs that are all their institutions that control the academic thought and control the literature and and set the tone and set the pace, and they'll come out and berate and bash anyone that steps out of line of this like controlled narrative that they want to pigeonhole people inside. And it couldn't be more obvious than today. Like, and more people are waking up to it and realizing how contrived and controlled and compartmentalized and owned by very, this pyramidal structuring of things, where it's just controlled by very few people at the top, and it's done quite easily. It's not a conspiracy at all. It's just how the money flows, and it's how the cookie crumbles, man. We're just downhill, and we get the crumbs. But I think there's a lot to be said about that, about how the controlling and the institutions, and that what we consume on a daily basis is heavily censored and heavily regulated by a select few number of individuals. And that's absolutely a fact. You even we even like are brainwashed to censor our own thoughts.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Final question, speaking of censorship and, controlled opposition and things like this, what are your thoughts on Stephen Greer? And I ask that because if you look at the Stephen Greer of say 2001, when he brought 400 or more military personnel, some of them very high rank, Don Phillips,
Yeah.
former Air Force CIA. I mean, I got to be honest. Many years ago, I'd like to say he really did some good initiatives and work. But nowadays, a lot of people have with his recent documentary, it seems like again, not saying him specifically, but there seems to be a tribalistic
He's definitely bitter with Leslie Keane, who came in and did some
right.
shady things in there with Disclosure Project. I think Disclosure Project was a little bit, it had good intentions, but it was sabotaged early on from the inside by a number of people. I mean, they let anyone come in there that had a story, and they didn't do a good vetting process. And I think a lot of disinformation got in there, and a lot of just a lot. There's also disinformation within those programs themselves. They're feeding you crap at the end. So if you do go forward, you got so much, you don't really know the whole picture of what's going on. You just know goddamn enough to do your job, and that's it. And that's all they really tell you. And the rest is a bunch of crap until you find out or have to learn yourself. And then you move up in the ranks.
Do you think he's authentic these days or no? If that's even a yes or no type.
I don't think he's bought out. I don't think he's controlled opposition. I just think he didn't have the science background to really know what he was doing with the whistleblowers. Didn't have the vetting process down. He started the Orion project, which was like the after the Disclosure Project, it was the scientific initiative to bring free energy and anti-gravity technology out. He got $1 million in funding that he admitted to for that he raised. And they blew it all. They didn't get anywhere. They have nothing to show for it. And we've done far less on a tenth of that amount so far. I mean, we've done far more on a tenth of that amount on far less. So
right. What are your thoughts on? I know there's criticisms against Greer and his crew and sort of Elizondo and his.
Well, then he got into the CE5 thing with these experiencer groups and he started leading these expeditions to go out and look for and summon aliens, and apparently he was dropping flares or flying drones around, and like there's been weird things. They don't let certain people like on the expeditions now too. I heard like they wouldn't let a person like me, and then because like my skepticism would make the aliens not want to show up and stuff like that. It's like weird. It's like they want a bunch of people that are easily fooled that they can fool, and they can charge 10 grand.
Was that a legitimate reason they said to you?
No, this is the stuff that I've heard from people that have paid money to go out in the desert and try to summon aliens with Stephen Greer under the CE5 program.
Right.
But also got to interview a couple. I admit I've been trying to do more research on this guy Tyler Zaradnik, who I saw on the Big Phone Home. I'm trying to get him on. I'm going to reach out to him this week and try to get him on an interview, because I want to talk to him more about the CE5 protocol and what this stuff is. Because according to him, it's not bullshit, but like according to a lot of people, a lot of the skeptics out there are convinced that it's a bunch of crap.
This is interesting because when on engaging the phenomenon that James Iandoli asked, if I'm not mistaken, asked Lou Elizondo about CE5 and all that, and he goes, well, it's not that I was ever against it, it's just that people never asked me about it. And it seems like anything, not just Mr. Elizondo, but Christopher Mellon, Jacques Vallée, anyone who's had any type of or alleged inside track on this phenomenon and disclosure, they seem to not want to talk about the telepathic, the sort of 0 point energy mental aspect of it. If you know what I'm saying, the consciousness.
Yeah, that's
side.
Interesting. That's interesting. Because Hal Puthoff endorsed Uri Geller. He said that Uri Geller had real superpowers, and there was a lot of these guys like Pat Price and others who Ingo Swann that had like these clairvoyant abilities and the remote viewing ability, and he swore by that under the work he did for the SRI International. And I don't know if that was just to get more government contracts to do more research on the stuff. Or whether, or it's some speculate that it was Cold War propaganda that they were paying him to say this was real so that the Russians would think we have this capability and waste their money and time researching it and creating counter spies and all this whole sci-spy nonsense. But again, a lot of this stuff goes back to the same groups of people like John Alexander, the U.S. Army psychological warfare programs. That's where I think a lot of the time travel conspiracy stuff came from, the Project Stargate and all that. I think
Yes.
that that
Yeah.
was that was spread as Cold War propaganda to make the Russians think that we could read their minds. We could send our spies in there with remote viewing and go in all their records and all their bases and all their secret facilities with psychic powers,
Right.
and that we could also travel back and forth in time.
Right. Do you, I mean, do you subscribe to the to believing the military personnel from the 2001 National Press Club conference? With, again, their credentials are clearly there, like you know, Don Phillips, with, you know, former CIA USAF, Lockheed Martin, saying like, listen, aliens are legit. You know, we've seen the bodies, we've seen the documents, we've seen the craft. Would you be inclined to believe these individuals? Or, I know it's good to be very healthy to be
I don't
skeptical,
think that
but
stuff's at Lockheed Martin. I really wouldn't. I think it would be at Dugway or
okay.
I
Okay.
think it would be at, I also, you mentioned about like we talked about this conspiracy within science to cover stuff up, and I forgot to mention the whole issue of Battelle, that they're
Yes.
this, and the fact that they manage all of our national laboratories, that
Battelle.
all the
Yep.
national labs are managed by this one company that's been a defense
Hmm.
contractor that allegedly got the pieces of the Roswell medal
This
because
is
they were the
the,
biggest metallurgist around that would have analyzed it in the
to
late
clarify, this is
40s.
the Battelle Memorial Institute, correct?
Yes, in Columbus, Ohio, their headquarters
Yes.
is, and so that's
Right.
just
Right.
45 minutes from Dayton, where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is, where the Roswell debris was flown. Whether it was a weather balloon or
Right.
not, it was flown to Roswell Material Command at Wright-Patterson, and
Right.
that's where it ended up. And the obvious contractor, if it was some strange memory foil metal that they couldn't identify and didn't know how it worked, and they needed to send it somewhere, they would have sent it to Battelle.
Do you
And the fact
yeah.
that Battelle now runs all our national labs, and there's this whole structuring within the national lab system that certain patents get bought up by these holding companies, that every national lab has their individual holding company,
Yeah.
a patent holding company,
Yes. Yeah.
and they're like scoop up bins for all the free energy, anti-gravity technology. There's all these rumors that stuff ends up in these bins, that they're basically watching all of our scientists and making sure that if they invent this stuff, it goes in, it goes bye-bye and we
So
never
you
get
so
it.
you so you believe that, you do believe that there is, like, for example, when you know, at the 2001 National Press Club, when some individuals with TK clearance and things like that, when they said, listen, you know, not only UFOs but the inhabitants of their craft not being from this planet in some cases are legitimate. And, you know, you have Ben Rich, the former head of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works division, saying
Right.
things.
He
Yeah.
apparently said that to Jim Tagliani. So the quote comes from Jim Tagliani. And so it's hearsay. There's no direct recording of Ben Rich, saying those things. But
Right.
I'm not familiar with the other guy. So yeah, I just be skeptical of, what people say and what people, I
Right.
don't know. I'm skeptical of it all because until you have hard proof that proves it, it's just a story, and it's just something that you have to believe is impossible, and you can't take for like solid. Just like the Eisenhower thing, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
could he have been meeting with aliens during those 2 weeks that he was unexplained, where he was, and does the timeline maybe work with some of these other things? Maybe,
You
but
have you yeah, sorry.
it could also be disinformation from guys like Richard Doty and Project Serpo trying to
Right.
distract people.
Those
And I think
oh, sorry.
even the MJ12 documents, right? I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that it could have been not, that those might have been faked with because that whole thing that was released at the same time, it came from like this other. I think it came from Richard Doty's office. They leaked that stuff, but I think that there may have been a group
Mm.
similar to the MJ12, and it might have been something else. Someone said it was the Mars Jupiter Committee, or that the MJ12 Majestic, or that it stood for. I've heard other things too. What the MJ stood for.
What are, can you say the other things that you've
What was
heard
the
of? Or,
other one?
oh, sorry,
Um,
if you don't remember, it's all good. I don't.
I'm trying to remember. It's in a slide presentation I put together, and it was this was actually came from Walter Bosley too, because he did some research on the into the MJ12 documents.
Even Einstein's assistant recently too, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, the whole thing with Einstein recently saying that, Einstein was involved with Roswell. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't buy it. I think that this is put out as disinformation to throw people off the trail again. It's just
interesting.
I think the person that was involved, if anyone was involved from that group, it would have been von Neumann. And
who's this, if I may ask?
John von Neumann was called the human calculator by his colleagues at Los Alamos. He would solve math problems for them. And when they came to difficult integrals or difficult physics problems, they would give them to John von Neumann, and he would come up with solutions.
Have you heard the quote from Hermann Oberth, Werner von Braun's mentor?
I think maybe Hermann Oberth was one of the people brought there too. I think it would have been these paperclip scientists, because they would have had the foreign aspect, they would have had the aerospace knowledge.
Yes, right. Right.
One of if you read the Twining memo and some of the original documents, they thought this thing was Horton craft, Horton Brothers craft. So they would have brought the paperclip scientists in for sure to view that. But they would have needed a physicist and someone with a classified, someone nearby, which John von Neumann was working at Sandia Labs right in north of Albuquerque. So it's about a 3 hour, maybe 3 hour drive from Roswell.
Right.
He had the security clearances. He worked on the Manhattan Project.
Yep.
He was one of the top physicists on that, so he had the top knowledge and top access. And then in October or November of 1947, just a few months after Roswell, he published a paper on von Neumann probes, which are self-replicating automata. They're space probes that can make copies of themselves and then keep going out and exploring, and they communicate with each other and send and share data and keep making copies of themselves and exploring further and further into the galaxy. And he wrote a paper on that, just a couple months after Roswell.
Right. Which, the timing is
yeah, it's quite strange. And he also there's a definite change that other colleagues of his noticed in his character after 1947, that he completely changed as a person.
I could see that.
He used to be this guy who was funny. He used to wear he had a collection of just hats. He would go out and buy different types of hats, and he had this huge hat collection. He was very outgoing and kind of just funny and stuff. And they said that after 1947, he just kind of didn't want to talk to anyone and was just in a trance most of the time.
It changed him.
It changed him.
Right. So when
because he couldn't talk about it, I think.
Right.
It's a social thing, it's here I am sitting on the greatest story ever and I can't talk about it.
Right. So when Hermann Oberth says, we cannot attribute, don't quote me directly word for word, but he says roughly, we cannot attribute all of the advancements in rocketry and propulsion to ourselves. We have been helped by the people of other worlds. When he says that, are you inclined to believe him? Again, I understand that it's not like he brought an alien on stage and said, hey, here it is, everyone. But are you inclined to believe individuals like that when they say those things and it's on record? Or
yeah, he said a lot of interesting things, including Roscoe Hillenkoetter, the first director of the CIA.
Yeah.
And Rear Admiral Hillenkoetter was, there's been a number of interesting quotes from people. Also Arthur Exon, he said something about materials that are from out of this world and metals that can't be explained and stuff like that. There's a lot of people who have stories of handling this stuff, and I think that if this material exists, it's thousands of years more advanced than what we're capable of understanding right now, but it at least gives us some insights into some of the physics that and the metallurgy of the future.
Right.
I don't know. It's just,
Right.
that's the way I look at it, is that it's like, maybe this is not good. Maybe it's like, it's almost like a cheat sheet, It's like, all right, I got a cheat sheet to pass the exams, and I don't deserve this degree or this respect, but or this technology, but I have it. I don't
Right.
know. And we're not, what are we unlocking? Is it like Pandora's box here? It's like, maybe we're not spiritually and socially evolved enough to handle this.
Right.
That's one thing I worry about too, because it's
That,
like,
yeah.
and maybe it's, I always get frustrated because I'm like, why isn't more people waking up and being onto this? And it's like, well, maybe we're not quite ready for it yet. Maybe
Right.
there's other things that need to like change first before
Do
we.
you think we're, oh, sorry.
I think we're gonna kill ourselves first if we don't
I
wake up to this soon. Like, if
do
we
you,
don't like disclose
yeah.
and like like start moving, because people are like so fucking helpless now, because they like think like, oh well, this is all impossible, and they've been brought up in this like contrived model of reality that they have to conform to, and then they get this. Even if they have dreams and hopes, right? By the time they're
Yeah.
done with 4 years of engineering school, those are long dead,
Right.
man. They've been beaten out of them with integrals and countless Lagrange multipliers and just the gauntlet of mathematics and differential equations that they've had to go through to get that degree, that they've had all that dream mostly beaten out of them. Most of them, not all of them,
Right.
but
Fair.
it's
Yeah.
we need some kind of hope to show people like, look, there's more to this. Like, we're going places. There's a whole future that you're not aware of, and we can get there. But
Well, to sort of end it off with that, do you think that we're currently living in a soft disclosure period, potentially?
well, yes and no. I think like the disclosure that has been come out, that the public admissions are very weak. They're very like old news. It's like, yes, this, of course, like we've known that you've studied this stuff and have lied to the public about it for 70 years. Thank you for finally admitting it. But can you tell us a little bit more? And they're like, well, we don't know anything more. And it's like, but there's lots of people that do. And like, how can it be that, I'm just some 40-year-old from Rhode Island who's researched this stuff for 15 years, and I apparently know more about a lot of these programs than these guys can talk about, publicly.
Mm.
That kind of bothers me, and that's why kind of I do what I do, because it's like, I come across this stuff, and I remember it, and I cross reference it, and I dig deep into it, and we're trying to get the truth out. I'm not like, a skeptic and debunker all the time. I'm a researcher and a truth seeker and a truth finder. And if there's something to this, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to dig it out and show it. And I don't know. It's I think that the guys like that are in the mainstream right now, it's soft disclosure. It's like, there's a lot of people that are playing for different parties and different interest groups, and I feel that there's limited disclosure and limited hangouts that are,
Right.
dangled in front of us, and they're the ones that seem to get popular and seem to get the mass mainstream media and the mass attention and the mass approval, whatever, in the algorithm that promotes them to the top and gets them so much popularity over, more complicated and detailed diving into doing deep dives on stuff, which is like, a lot of people like find that stuff boring. It's not like this headline. They want all the research done and presented on a silver platter, so they don't have to think,
And they
kind
wanted
of
also,
thing.
sorry if
And
I could say, they wanted to fit the size of their phone screen.
yes, and
Yeah.
so like,
Yeah.
if you don't have all that in a media company and editors like condensing it down and putting it into that with the music and the flashy graphics and all that, then you're not communicating on their level, and you're just, whatever.
You think
So,
nukes, you think that these ETs or UFOs are going to prevent us from going into a nuclear warfare? Maybe not kinetic, but nuclear?
I think they already have. I mean, that's
Yeah.
already been
Yeah.
talked about for,
Yeah.
the scenarios that have played out with the Russians. You know, we
Yep.
almost went to DEFCON 5 like
Yep.
at one time, and like the Russians were doing the same thing, and they shut it all down on us, and it was just like this
Yeah. Yeah.
moment where we could be like, oh God, like we don't want to do this. You don't want to
Right.
do this.
Right. No, exactly. But
It clear, like it's been clear they've been set like either that or it's somebody else sending a message to
right.
us, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
with these crazy capabilities. You
Well,
know, either way,
Project
it's equally as
A119, right? They wanted to bring a nuke to the moon. Apparently, a UFO came from the moon, shot some beams of what is some type of energy at it, and the missile just fell.
Yeah. They're just basically showing that you do not have space dominance and someone else does. And yeah, well, someone showed us that, and the message is clear.
You know, the
So,
example I like to use, just to wrap it up, if it's cool. You know, for example, if you have a cat or a pet, I just use cat as an example, and it's a new cat or it's a kitten, and you're eating at the kitchen table, and it keeps jumping up on the table, and you have to teach it like, no, you have to pick it up and put it back on the floor. You know, that type of thing. I feel like that we're the cat, and the owner saying no, don't do this, are the ETs with respects to nukes and all that. You know what I mean? Saying like, listen, you guys still need guidance. You guys are not there yet.
yeah, I feel like I can subscribe to that, even though I don't really have any proof of that, but it feels right to me. I just feel like that
Right.
I'm here for a higher purpose than just to eat, sleep, and work a 9 to 5 until I die and hand over what little I made to my kids. I think that we're here for something bigger, and the people that are in this community realize that they're part of that, and they just I think it's about coming together for common goals, but we also have to we also have a limited amount of time in our day, man, and
Yeah.
I understand that this stuff, it takes years to learn and have a brain for some of the science and stuff that even I have trouble wrapping my head around sometimes. So there's people out there that are incredibly smart and are working on this stuff, but again, I just I think there's smart people out there too that are just as easily misled as into different things,
I
because
I
we're all social creatures, and we're all looking for the approval of our peers.
I couldn't agree more. Could you please tell our audience where they can find you, how they can find you? I mean, I'm pretty sure you're quite famous amongst the community, but if it never hurts to plug uh, your
Yeah,
website and your show and all that.
yeah, man. Well, again, thanks for having me, Zed. And I'm the alien scientist. You can find me at my website's alienscientist.com. I also have the altpropulsion.com website with Tim Ventura and Mark, where we and a couple other engineers and scientists like Jeremiah and others, where we've sort of created this community of physicists and engineers to explore alternate propulsion and those technologies. And I'm also alien underbar scientist on Twitter. I don't do much Facebook these days. That last Zuckerberg metaverse video really freaked me out.
Yeah.
I don't even want to open up Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, especially with all just everything you do on there is being collected and sold as metadata to it's just disgusting. They really ought to be.
You see the facial recognition thing they just said? They deleted it. Oh, I'm sure.
Sure, we believe you.
I mean, maybe
right.
They deleted it, but the NSA and this, I'm sure they got their hands on it.
Damage is already done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like,
yeah. Genie's out of the bottle.
It's like too little, too late, man. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's just. But yeah, Twitter and also I'm on minds.com. I'm going to be moving to minds.com and moving off of Facebook. And trying to look, for some of these other, platforms and stuff where they don't censor people like us. And
right.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. But yeah, they can find me on any of those places. thealienscientist@gmail.com. If you want to send me an email, I'd love to be on your show. And again, I'm sorry it took us so long to connect on this one, man. My schedule is all over the place.
No,
and
please. I know you're very
uh,
busy. Not to worry at all, man. That's, I know, reaching out sometimes. Some people, they say, hey, I can do tomorrow. Other people say, hey, man, it's got to be next month or whatever. So I get it. I really do. But thank you so much once again, brother. And this was a phenomenal conversation. I cannot thank you enough. Truly.
Awesome. I hope I answered a lot of your questions, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.